This is Cheeseburger Eddy, and he is one of the supporting characters in the movie called The Longest Yard.
Baby back, bitch. Baby back, bitch.
It's a big-ass robot.
And you see, when he was in prison, people saw that Eddy was a great football player when playing for the Mean Machine, but he was an even better teammate, always having a cheeseburger ready for his guys. But a lot of people don't know the story about how Cheeseburger Eddy got to prison, and how his love for McDonald's led him towards a life of crime, while at the peak of his college football career. So today, I will be putting Cheeseburger Eddy into College Football 25. Be ready to hear the first ever telling of this man's backstory as we'll follow him on his road to glory. Now growing up, y'all, Cheeseburger Eddy was a foster kid. He had bounced around from home to home, and oftentimes he was even flat out homeless. And that's probably why when he started to get his life together, he got real good at keeping track of his money.
And that's $2.89 worth of food.
But now, coming out of high school at 6'3" and 250 pounds of pure muscle, there were a lot of teams that wanted to recruit him at the tight end / wide receiver position. But you see, growing up in a small town in Texas and still being relatively stingy with his money, Cheeseburger Eddy didn't want to deal with any extra expenses that could arise from going to a different place. So ultimately, for his college decision, Cheeseburger Eddy decided to sign with SMU. As soon as Cheeseburger Eddy stepped onto campus, he was already becoming a leader. He just had that likable attitude and people gravitated towards him. But on the field, he was doing pretty well too, and he was proving that he could move extremely well at his size. So the coaches were thinking about ways to get him incorporated in the offense in the first game, maybe at wide receiver. Before the first game, one of Eddy's teammates had asked him if he wanted to go to McDonald's because Eddy had never been there before. But at first, Eddy didn't really like that idea.
You got some McDonald's money?
So y'all gotta understand that Eddy was cool with just eating some ramen noodles and some hot sauce and calling it a day. But Eddy had eventually promised his teammates that they can go out to McDonald's if they win their first game of the season against West Virginia. Now to start the season off, the coaches had decided to put Eddy in at tight end, and even though he was blocking well, it didn't really matter when his quarterback was throwing picks. Eddy started to become a little bit more involved in the offense by the end of the first quarter, coming up with his first catch of his college career that went for a first down. And it turns out that Eddy would get a pretty good chunk of playing time with the starting tight end injured for the first week. And to say that Cheeseburger Eddy was making the most of his opportunities would still be an understatement, because by the end of the first quarter, he caught the ball on his RPO, and he was breaking loose. There was only one man who could catch him on the way to the end zone, but he dove across the goal line for a touchdown. His first one of his college football career. And he was hoping he'd be able to score a lot more throughout the season. When he came back in the game in the second quarter, his team was still losing and had to settle for a field goal after getting stopped on third down. And later on in the fourth quarter, they were still losing, but they had Eddy motion out to the left side from the tight end position because they wanted him to make a play. They wanted him to run just straight upfield, and he was wide open. He was catching the ball over the top that brought his team deep into plus territory, setting them up for a chance to potentially take the lead, which eventually they did. And SMU would go on to win their first game of the season, 26-22. And in Eddy's first game, he was able to go for 141 yards and 1 touchdown, making several big plays that helped his team secure a victory, and the coaches were definitely thinking about making him more of a wide receiver. But since SMU did win the first game, Eddy and his teammate went out to go get McDonald's. And since it was the first time that Eddy had ever gone out to eat before, this man loved it. But it would turn out to be one of the best and worst things to ever come into his life. But at this point, Eddy was just focused on trying to get better and help his team win some games, because he promised his teammate that for every win they get, they can go down to Mickey D's and get a Big Mac. So now SMU's trying to win their first home game of the season, as they're set to face off against the UGF Pandas. Now to start this game off, they had Cheeseburger Eddy lined up in the slot, and he was showing a great ability to power ahead and pick up a first down in traffic. But they also had him line up outside more, and even though he was slow, he was finding ways to get open, and he was making some big plays. He only got to play a little bit in this game throughout the first half, but he made the most of it as he said, "Mwang," snagged this ball at the side of the end zone in damn near double coverage, and Cheeseburger Eddy had done enough to help his team win this game.
And that's the truth, with some cheese on it.
As SMU would go on to blow out UGF 27-0, and Eddy had gone on to lead the receiving room again, but this time with limited opportunities. You see, Eddy started to really like his situation here at SMU. He got to help his team win football games, his teammates would buy him McDonald's, and now he didn't have to be so stingy about the food in his apartment no more.
That's $1.09 in the trash. That's 49 cents of spilt milk dripping all over my table. Somebody gonna drink this milk.
Everything seemed to be going well, and Eddy was hoping it would keep going well as they stay at home and face off against BYU. Now the coaches still wanted Eddy to be a tight end, so they brought him in sometimes to be a blocker, and it worked as SMU would get in for the first touchdown of the game. But now Eddy was trying to get in for his own touchdown, and he had some words for his defender when he came out on the next drive.
I got the shakes that'll make you quake. I got the fries that'll cross your eyes. I got the burgers that'll... I just got burgers.
Eddy had his defender doing the ncaa in the end zone as he caught this reception for a touchdown, getting in for a score that extends SMU's lead to 2 possessions, and it looks like Eddy still got something to say.
There ain't no meatloaf between these buns.
Eddy would only go out there for a limited time in the second half, but he was still doing a lot with his opportunities, and ultimately SMU would go on to win this game 24-21. In this game, Eddy only had 2 receptions, but he still got in the end zone. It was showing the coaches that he could be a key focal point in this offense. Now this is the point where Eddy's love for McDonald's would become a very good thing and a bad thing, because after the game he decided that he was going to go out to a party and he was going to sell some McDonald's cheeseburgers to the people, and he actually made a little bit of money. So the following bye week, when there was way more parties, Eddy was buying some cheeseburgers off the dollar menu and selling them for $5. He was out there making more money than he had ever made in his entire life. And on top of that, he was contributing to a squad that was now one of the top 25 ranked teams in the country, and they were about to face off against TCU. Now, this was a game where Eddy played his fewest snaps of the season, but in those snaps he made some key plays like this one right before half, putting his team in position to score a touchdown, and then later on towards the end of the fourth quarter on 3rd down and 13, he came up with another play across the middle to extend the chains and keep the drive moving. And the coaches had decided to keep him out for the rest of the game, but it was all good because they would go on to win 21-13. And Eddy's 2 receptions would actually go on to be the 2nd most yards for the team. And with Eddy starting to make a name for himself on the field, he had reporters asking him questions like who's to credit for the team's success. And this man could have said his teammates, the coaches, maybe even the fans, but nah, this dude said McDonald's. And he even said that they should let him eat there for free. Now, even though at this point Eddy was the 3rd string wide receiver, the coaches still had some game day challenges for him. So he knew he had to really lock in going against the 17th ranked team in the country, Florida State. Now this was a game where Eddy didn't even get put in until the second half. And when he did get in, it wasn't really going too well at first. Eventually though, on this 3rd down, Eddy would find a way to get himself wide open, and he was now coming up with a play that brought his team well beyond midfield, but he is still slow and gets tracked down. Still a great play made by the freshman, and even though he's taken out the game, at least his team is putting some points on the board. Now he came out here again on the following drive to help pick up a 1st down for his team on this 3rd down, and apparently that was pivotal in a drive that would go on to allow SMU to take the lead. And by the end of this game, Eddy's constant efforts to pick up 1st downs would ultimately be enough to help win this game, as SMU goes on to take down Florida State 24-16. And Eddy's 64 yards off of only 3 receptions were very crucial, so the coaches weren't too upset about him not hitting his goal. But on top of that, Eddy would get a message from McDonald's offering free food for the whole season. And Eddy didn't even hesitate because he could eat McDonald's all day. Plus, he knew that he was about to make a lot of money, so he was glad he didn't have to work on some mall Santa no more.
Do you know how much all that stuff costs?
No.
Do you have that kind of money?
No.
Well, neither does Santa.
But now Eddy is ready to get into his next game of the season, as he's heading on the road to face off against Louisville. Now Eddy had came in the game where his quarterback had thrown a pick, and on his very first play he was having to chase down a defender to prevent a touchdown, but unfortunately he still gets in for the pick 6. So when he came back in this game, he was doing his best to help his team put some points up, and they did go on to score, but so did Louisville. By the end of the 3rd quarter though, SMU had an 11-point lead. And on this 3rd down and 15, Eddy was coming up with a big play to extend the chains for his team. The coaches love how he always makes the most of his opportunities, so they put him back in later on in the 4th quarter, and he was coming up with a play towards the outside for a touchdown, a score that would extend SMU's lead, and Eddy was hyped that he had helped put this game away.
Baby back, bitch. Baby back, bitch.
SMU would go on to win this game 38-24. And at this point, Eddy had established himself as one of the main guys in this offense, even while still being a backup tight end and being the number 3 receiver. Eddy just knew that he would always go out there and try to make a play whenever he could, and especially in his next game on the road against Stanford. Now, apparently this offense had started off slow by being down by 14, but on back-to-back drive, there were other receivers coming up with big plays and bringing SMU across the goal line multiple times in order to tie this game up at 14. Now, before the end of the first half, Eddy would come up with his first reception of the game, but that would be the last time that he got in up until the 4th quarter. And in the 4th quarter, now down by 7, Eddy was once again the guy to move the sticks for his team and pick up 1st downs. He was making a lot of tough catches across the middle to get his team in scoring position, And as this time was running down, they would eventually get themselves down to the goal line, where Eddy would hit them with a little skibbity-doo-bop and get in the end zone for a touchdown, making the biggest play of the game in the biggest moment. And it turns out that SMU would go on to win this game by 3.
You gotta always protect the McNuggets.
Eddy was helping his team come away with another victory, and if it couldn't get any better, he was about to go out to another party after the game and sell some cheeseburgers. Except this was about to become a problem that we'll get into a little bit more later. Because for now, it turns out that all of Eddy's hard work on the field was about to earn him a chance to move up in the depth chart. And Eddy was definitely doing his best to take advantage of the chance because he wanted to move up. Besides the fact that he knew he was one of, if not the best receiver on the team, he could make more money if more people knew his name. So now that Cheeseburger Eddy is the second string receiver, he's going to try his best to make a big impact in his next game against Duke. Now, even though Eddy had moved up as a receiver, they still used him as a tight end at times. He was one of the best blockers on the team and was part of the reason why SMU scored a touchdown on their opening possession. Now, it wouldn't be till late in the second quarter where Eddy would start making some plays and moving the sticks for his team. And there was actually a play right before half where Eddy had ran down the field and was thinking about cheeseburgers for a minute before turning around and making a block that sprung his teammate loose for a touchdown, getting in for a score that would take the lead over Duke, and now they just have to maintain it. So throughout the entire second half, and a lot of times it would be on third down, where Eddy was continuously making plays to extend the drive and chew some of that clock. His ability to get open over the middle was unmatched amongst his peers, and he had got his squad in position where on this drive, his teammate ended up going for a touchdown, extending SMU's lead to 2 possessions and doing enough to effectively put an end to this game, as they would go on to finish this one off 20-10. And shout out to the entire receiving room for doing their thing. But unfortunately for Eddy, in an entirely different kind of room, they were also doing their thing. And they were starting to pick up on some things that may or may not be illegal activity. Because you see, it turns out that Eddy is not supposed to be selling the free food that he gets from McDonald's. It was fine when he was buying it off the dollar menu, and he would even be fine to give it away for free. But it wasn't a part of his deal that he could make a profit off of what they give him. And that's where Eddy was about to find himself in some trouble, but he did not realize it yet. For now, he was just focused on trying to help his team win another game as they were set to face off against Pittsburgh. Now to start this game off, this cornerback had decided to leave Eddy wide open. So out of nowhere on this opening drive, Eddy had nobody within 20 yards of him as he was making this catch and getting towards the end zone for the first touchdown of the game. That was definitely the easiest score of his life, but apparently there was more to come. The one thing that Eddy liked about his team is that there was always going to be other receivers to step up and make a play. But after SMU got back down towards the goal line, Eddy had finessed his way across it for another touchdown, getting in for another score to make this now 14-6. But Eddy was still hungry to make some more plays. So after they got the ball right before halftime, Eddy would find himself wide open, and the quarterback was delivering a dime. Eddy had caught this ball up the seam, and somehow he was racing past all the defenders. He was still pretty slow, but not too slow that he couldn't get across the goal line for a touchdown, getting in for a score that extends SMU's lead to 2 possessions. And even though SMU's offense would struggle a lot throughout the second half, they had already done enough to put this game away, as SMU goes on to win this one 24-13. And Cheeseburger Eddy had an incredible game, 9 receptions for over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Easily the best performance out of any SMU player this year, and it was probably the reason why he was now getting a chance to be the #1 receiver for this team. And it was still really surprising to a lot of the coaches that he could move the way he could at his size. But nevertheless, he was doing it consistently. And they had no choice but to eventually make him the #1 wide receiver for SMU. And now in a season where SMU has been undefeated up to this point, Cheeseburger Eddy's just hoping that he can help keep it going as they're about to face off against Boston College. They got this game started off well with Eddy making a nice little catch to move the chains. But on the play where Eddy was supposed to run a route to the corner, the quarterback didn't even let him finish before making the throw, and it ends up getting picked. So definitely not a great way to get this game started by going down by 7. But it was all good because Eddy was out there trying his best to make some plays. He had helped his team get across midfield, and now he was going to try to bring him across the goal line. On 3rd down and 2, Eddy was getting open over the middle on this play, but the quarterback cut through it late, and it ends up getting picked off once again. So instead of tying this game up, now SMU is down by 14. But with less than 15 seconds left in the half, Eddy is out there from the slot, and he's trying to make a play to potentially get his team in the end zone. He is breaking loose after this reception, and even though he's kind of slow, he's still able to get across the goal line for a touchdown, coming up with the score to make this a now 1-possession game going into the second half. But after half, when they finally got the ball back, this SMU offense was not able to get things going at all. The one person who was making any kind of plays in this game was Cheeseburger Eddy, but by then they were down by 2 possessions in the 4th quarter, and after this pass on 4th down and 4 falls incomplete, Eddy was about to take his first loss of the season, as SMU goes on to lose this game 20-7. And even though Eddy had gone for over 150 plus yards receiving, it still wasn't enough to help get the job done. On the bright side though, Eddy did go on to win his first ACC Offensive Player of the Week, and it inspired him to start working hard to get better. And he also wanted to slow down with the cheeseburger business because he didn't want to get caught up. Unfortunately, the feds have already noticed that he has made tens of thousands of dollars off his scheme. But technically they didn't have enough evidence yet, so they were willing to let it ride out. And thankfully they did, because Cheeseburger Eddy was ready to have his best game of his career, as SMU was facing off against Virginia. Early on in this game, on 3rd down and 2, Eddy had caught his first touchdown of the game to make this 7-0. But little did the entire stadium know that Eddy wasn't even close to being done yet, because after getting across the goal line for another touchdown before the half ended, he came out in the 3rd quarter and it seemed like Virginia forgot to guard him, because this dude was wide open on his way towards the end zone for his 3rd touchdown of the game. And even though it was already the 4th quarter, it seemed like there were still some more plays for Cheeseburger Eddy to make. Because with under 2 minutes left, SMU was down by 2 possessions, but Eddy Cheeseburger was the guy to get them across the goal line again and make it a 1-score game. And with now getting the ball back with around 30 seconds left, Eddy Cheeseburger was making another play across the middle, and he was outrunning the entire defense to get his team across the goal line and send this game into overtime. Where on this 1st down and 10, can you believe that Eddy is getting across for another score? He helps to tie this game back up at 42. On the following drive, Eddy ran around across the middle and pretty easily got in for the final score of this game. And after helping SMU complete the comeback, Eddy had something to say to that crowd.
It ain't easy being cheesy.
SMU would finish off this game 48-42, and Eddy Cheeseburger would have the greatest game in SMU history. Over 200 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns, tying the FBS record for the most receiving touchdowns in a game, and deservingly so. He would go on to win National Offensive Player of the Week. Now, with 1 game left in the regular season, SMU is one of the top-ranked teams in the conference. But if they want any chance of playing in the conference championship, they're going to have to finish off their season strong against California. In the 2nd quarter, Cheeseburger Eddy was coming up with his first catch of the game, and the crowd was celebrating because it turns out that it was his 75th catch of the season. Now down by 7 in the first half, Eddy had made some plays to help get his team a field goal before the 3rd quarter. And in the second half, even though they struggled, Eddy was still making those plays to help get his team a chance to tie the game up. They didn't want to lose this game and potentially miss out on the college football playoffs, so there were a lot of other players who were stepping up as well. Eventually though, Eddy would hit the DB with a little hey, and get in for a touchdown that would help SMU win this game, as they would go on to win by 1 point in the final game of the season. And Eddy Cheeseburger would win himself another player of the game, but it turns out that SMU will still not be able to play in the conference championship. So now that it's the end of the season, it's time for some awards to be given out. And the quarterback from Ohio State goes on to win the Heisman Trophy, and it turns out that Eddy would go on to win some awards as well. Accolades such as First Team All-ACC and a Freshman All-American. And that was all great, but now Eddy has to focus on what's important, because at this point, Eddy Cheeseburger was about to lead SMU into their first playoff game in their history, and hopefully they'll be able to take down number 3 ranked Liberty. Now, SMU had started this game off down 7-0, but throughout the 2nd quarter, Cheeseburger Eddy was the guy to help make a play and bring his team down to the goal line. And he was also the one to help get across it for SMU's first points of the game, as they tie it up by 7 going into the second half, but there was still more work to do after they go back down by 3. And this was a game where Eddy was out there putting his body on the line even if they didn't get the first down. But with this game now tied up at 10, they need Eddy to keep making plays. And he was doing a great job with this toe tap on the sideline. But he was trying to be even greater by making this catch over the middle and bringing his team deep into scoring range. Eddy would go down inside the 10-yard line. And it would only be a couple plays later that the running back would get across the goal line for a touchdown and send SMU to the next round, as they would go on to win this game 17-10. And shout out to Cheeseburger Eddy for over 160 yards and 1 touchdown. Now, Eddy had never worked so hard in his life towards a particular goal, and he doesn't want to stop anytime soon because he doesn't want to let anybody down. SMU is now 1 game away from potentially making the national championship. All they have to do now is just get past the one team standing in their way, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, on the first play of SMU's opening drive, Cheeseburger Eddy said, "Mwang," snagging this ball off this dude's head, and just like that, he was making his way towards the end zone for the first score of the game, already giving SMU the lead to start this game out, and he was hoping that this momentum would carry on going forward. In the 2nd quarter, though, unfortunately, this quarterback would start throwing some interceptions, ones that would likely take some points off the board for SMU, but that was all good, because with Eddy Cheeseburger finding a way to wrap these boys up on the outside, he was oftentimes getting open and doing his best to move the sticks. But on the 2nd down and 20, the quarterback would take a sack, and they were putting SMU in a pretty bad spot. So now it's 3rd down and 27, and Eddy knows that he's got to make a play. So he ran straight up the field in this play and said, "Wang," coming up with the catch and then immediately breaking off a tackle and diving towards the end zone on the 1-yard line. That's crazy. But on the next play, the running back gets in for a touchdown to take the lead. And after the SMU offense gets the ball back almost immediately, all they have to do is just keep getting first downs to chew this clock and put the game away. And after Cheeseburger Eddy comes up with this reception and powers his way forward for a first down, he had helped do enough to send SMU to the national championship. They go on to win this game 14-10, and Cheeseburger Eddy had another 200-plus yard game. But now that they have made it to the national championship, it looks like they're going to be facing off against the Oregon Ducks. And this will 100% be the biggest challenge for SMU throughout the entire season, as Oregon has the #1 offense and the #1 defense. So if SMU could find a way to come away with the victory, not only will it be an upset, but it might be one of the biggest ones throughout the entire history of the national championship. Now, this game did not start out well, with SMU getting stopped on 3rd down and having to settle for 3 points. But in the second quarter, there was another player who was coming up with a big play that was about to start breaking this game open. He got across the goal line for a touchdown to take the lead over Oregon and put SMU in a great spot. They got the ball back in the second half, and Cheeseburger Eddy was doing his best to get them in position to score a field goal. They had about 30 seconds left, and they were in position for a score, but the quarterback throws this ball before Eddy can finish his route, and it ends up getting picked off. Definitely taking some points off the board for SMU, but it was all good as long as it didn't keep going. But in the second half, their opening possession would actually start out with another pick. And just like that, this game was now tied at 10-0 going into the fourth quarter. Luckily though for SMU, Cheeseburger Eddy was dominating this defense, because even though they had the #1 ranked pass D, Eddy still made plays to help lead his team down towards the goal line, where the running back had crossed over it for a touchdown to take the 7-point lead. But now tied at 17-17, SMU is in great position to finally win this game. And it turns out that somebody else was making a big play. After a year where Cheeseburger Eddy had been the guy all season, they had number 12 on the opposite side, who apparently had snagged the ball off the heads of 3 defenders. And now all SMU needs to do is just get into field goal range, and Eddy was actually open on this play, but the quarterback throws it late and it gets picked off, sending this game into overtime where, you know what? Cheeseburger Eddy wants to come up with a play to potentially win this game. So he runs up and breaks off his route at 8 yards, and now Cheeseburger thinks that he is wide open, but no. The Oregon defender would go on to pick off this pass. And just like that, SMU would go on to lose in the national championship. But after a season where absolutely nobody expected him to make it to the playoffs, let alone this far, it's hard for each and every one of these players not to be proud of what they accomplished. And even though they didn't get it done this year, Eddy is just hoping that one day he'll have a chance to finally win a championship, whether it be at the college or the pro level. Now, as far as the season stats with all the extra games, Eddy went on to lead the entire country in reception and receiving yards, not to mention the 19 touchdowns that he scored throughout the season. And as a freshman, he had already established himself as the greatest receiver in the history of SMU, breaking multiple single game and even single season records. But after the season is where things started to get a little sticky for Cheeseburger Eddy, because it turns out that one of his classmates had actually snitched to the cops about the whole McDonald's scheme. And it's safe to say that Cheeseburger wasn't happy with it.
You acting like a real McAsshole.
So at this point, Eddy felt like he had to transfer to another school to try to get away from everything. He felt like it might be his only option if he wanted to avoid prison time. So Cheeseburger Eddy definitely had an upcoming decision to make, but I'll leave that decision up to you guys. If you want to see a part 2 of this video, be sure to get this one to 1,000 likes and subscribe to the channel down below. But also comment down below, where should Eddy transfer to, if at all. Be sure to also let me know what else you guys want to see next, and check out some of these other stories until the next one comes out. If you got to this point in the video, just know that I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. I hope you all have an incredible week, and other than that, I'm gonna catch you guys next time.